Hello and welcome. Today's episode of Idols will be dedicated to someone I mentioned in the previous episode about Chester. Whenever you or someone else think of young, promising or talented musician who left us too soon, the first name, or one of the first that comes to your mind would be Kurt Cobain. And today I want to dedicate this episode to him and talk about what did it take to become the voice of a generation. Behind the music, behind the fame and the iconic status, Kurt Cobain's life was a roller coaster of psychological struggles, family chaos, and a pressure of sudden success. How did a kid from a small grey town battle his demons, rise to the top, and change music forever only to burn too soon? How a man who gave a generation its soundtrack but couldn't find peace within himself. So, dear friends, Kurt Cobain. To better understand the history of Kurt Cobain's rise, let's travel back to mid-60s in the town of Aberdeen. Aberdeen was a small industrial town in Washington state. Most of its residents worked at sawmills, in factories. Aberdeen was a grey town, constantly covered in either fog or smoke from factories. For the youth of 60s, the only entertainment was watching logs float down the river after being cut down. The town's population was extremely conservative, meaning that after work a man expected to come home to dinner and waiting wife. All the men were expected to be strong, engage in sports in their free time, and of course serve in the military. Aberdeen in mid-60s seemed hidden behind the curtain of still America and didn't acknowledge new trends or subcultures. If a hippie had appeared at that time in town, they would probably been driven out of town. And it was this very place that on 20th February 1967, a child with a beautiful appearance and blue eyes was born, named Kurt Cobain. His parents, Don and Wendy Cobain, were no different from the other people of Aberdeen. Don worked as a mechanic at the plant in neighboring town. Wendy, on the other hand, was a true beauty, only 19 years old, having just graduated from the high school, now raising a child and managing the home. Don and Wendy lived below the poverty line. To support the family, Don had to work more and more, but even that wasn't enough. Relatives, mostly Don's parents, helped the family. Despite the family's poverty, Wendy wanted her son to grow up happy, so she spent money on beautiful, bright things so he didn't have to wear dirty, torn clothes. And she bought him toys and even managed to afford something very expensive for their family, a video camera. On this camera, she recorded the early years of the little angel, Kurt Cobain. From the moment of his birth, Kurt was surrounded by love and care, and all the relatives adored him. Family friends noticed that such a beautiful child belonged on screen. He should be a superstar. Along with this love, Kurt was surrounded by music from an early age. His uncle played in a band, and his aunt, Maria, played the guitar. and his great uncle was a professional musician, an Irish tenor. On weekends, the Cobain house was often filled with relatives who relaxed, listened to music, and played guitars. By the age of 2, Kurt Cobain was already humming Beatles songs he heard on TV. Seeing this, the family was charmed by little Kurt and bought him a plastic toy drum set. The boy drummed all day long and sang every song he heard. Like any child, he had a rich imagination. He was endlessly sketching and creating, and unexpectedly, for those around him, started communicating with an imaginary friend named Bud. He talked to him, played with him, and even went for walks. Kurt's parents, of course, were worried. Being conservative people, they feared that rumors might spread around the small town that something was wrong with their child. In the end, Don and Wendy decided to tell Kurt one day that his friend Bud left to fight in Vietnam. What was remarkable about this story, Kurt actually stopped talking to his friend Bud, but he never forgot him. And on the last day of Kurt Cobain's life, the old imaginary friend would return to him, but let's talk about this later. For now, Kurt was still a child and he gained a sister, Kimberly, or simply Kim. There was a famous photo of entire Cobain family: Don, Wendy, Kim and Kurt. Wendy spent a long time dressing up the children for this shoot and wanted to capture the image of perfect family. Kurt often played with his sister, but even more often he drummed on his toy drums. The Cobain relatives began to notice that Kurt had some incredible abilities for a child. He could hear a melody on the TV and then go to the piano and immediately play it by ear. I have to mention he hadn't had a formal music education and had only just begun attending a regular school. It wasn't his parents who were most impressed by Kurt's talents, but his aunt and uncle, Mary and Chuck. They constantly bought Kurt new records and listened to music with him. They saw how fascinated Kurt was by it. His father, however, was only concerned with raising Kurt to be a real man. The boy attended various sports clubs, but nothing fascinated him as much as music. Kurt did well in school and participated in sports competitions. He was a very energetic child, impossible to stop. He was always running, jumping, drumming and singing songs. He couldn't sit still. And in all of this, Kurt's parents suddenly saw a problem. They were concerned about his excessive, as they saw it, energy. The child was taken to a psychologist to calm him down, and the doctor prescribed Ritalin. That's a psychotropic drug, basically. For better understanding, this Ritalin is banned in many countries as a drug with horrifying side effects. But this is what they started to give Kurt Cobain. Kurt became quieter, but the Cobain family faced more serious problems. As we remember, they was very poor and money problems only worsened. Only Don worked while Wendy took care of house and children. Kurt became quieter, but the Cobain family faced more serious problems. The family, as we remember, was very poor and money problems just worsened. Only Don worked while Wendy took care of the house and children. Meanwhile, Don spent his free time on sports and playing baseball, hardly spending any time with the family. This led to frequent arguments at home. Don and Wendy constantly fought in front of the children. Kurt, who was always surrounded by love and care, began to notice that it was all disappearing. He received less and less attention, and the boy began to retreat into himself. When another argument broke out at home, Kurt hid into the closet to avoid seeing or hearing the terrible fights. When the once bright-eyed, energetic child of Aberdeen became dull and silent, Don Cobain realized that something was terribly wrong in the family. It became harder to borrow money from relatives, and this depressed him. At the same time, he wanted to keep the family together. Don quit the job, found another one with the better pay, but things didn't improve. Wendy was unhappy that Don spent all his free time on sports and hanging out with friends. And it all ended tragically. Wendy filed for divorce. This was a blow for Don. The whole town would know that his family had fallen apart. But the greatest tragedy was experienced by Kurt. He watched as his once happy family fell apart, and he, a small child, would do nothing about it. 9-year-old Kurt Cobain wrote at the wall of the house, "I hate my parents. Dad hates mom, mom hates dad." At 9 years old, he had to choose which parent to live with. Kurt chose his father, and they left the house where Kurt was once surrounded by love and care. At first, they lived in a trailer park. Kurt spent a lot of time with his grandparents. They gave Kurt a worn but functional guitar. He spent a lot of time with the instrument. At the same time, Kurt showed the great success in school. He studied well, joined the school band where he played drums, and his father's delight, attended all the sports clubs. Kurt saw how his father liked this, and as a result, he started spending more time with him. Essentially, he gave Kurt what he had been missing: attention. But suddenly, Don Cobain started dating. Women liked him. Handsome, fit, hardworking. What happened to Kurt during this time? He saw every new woman as an enemy. He felt that the woman would ruin their newly stabilized family. Don took Kurt on dates, and not just for fun. As a conservative man, he wanted to show that family was the most important thing for him. But Kurt ruined every one of Don's dates. As soon as they went out with a new girl, Kurt started misbehaving. He threw tantrums, screamed, ran off, and did everything he could to make the girl not want to live with him. He wanted to have his father's full attention. The only time Kurt behaved normally was when his father went on a date with a woman named Jenny Westby. She was divorced like Don, and she had 2 children living with her. Don fell in love. They went on a walk with their children, and on this date, Kurt behaved like a perfect child. He played with her kids, didn't swear or yell, and in this way, he gave his father green light. Don and Jenny grew closer and eventually decided to move in together. With the help of relatives, Don bought a small house in Montesana. Kurt gained a new brother and sister and a new family. He also continued to develop his passion for the guitar. Relatives often visited him, and everyone was happy. But this idyllic picture lasted only until Kurt underwent new changes. He noticed that Jenny loved her own children more than him, and they could snack anytime while Kurt was told to eat only on schedule. This annoyed him, but his father did nothing about it. Kurt was again overwhelmed by the thought that he was not getting enough attention. Every time he visited his mother, he complained about his father, but at his mother's house, he felt like an outsider. Kurt noticed that his mother had a new boyfriend, and the man lived in the house where Kurt was once happy. This new boyfriend was a bad guy. He drank, was dirty and mean. Wendy had also taken up drinking with him. All this hit Kurt hard psychologically, and at his father's house with his new woman, he felt unwanted, and at the same time, same thing happened at his mother's house. He withdrew again, became aggressive at school and started failing his classes. He quit the sports clubs. Kurt felt like no one needed him and declared war on everyone, especially his father, who had chosen someone else's children. By the age of 14, Kurt's war against everyone reached its peak. He dressed in dirty clothes, constantly listened to music, lazed around, dyed his hair and failed his classes. He was held back a year. He always wore a black trench coat, and his peers saw him as an outcast. When a classmate once asked him what he wanted to do in the future, Kurt replied, "I plan to become a rock star, commit suicide at 27 at the peak of my career, like Jimi Hendrix." His friend retorted, Hendrix didn't commit suicide, but Kurt didn't care. At 14, Kurt experimented with drugs and began drinking. With his friends, he stole alcohol from stores, smashed shop windows at night. Eventually, that led to his arrest and a police case being opened against him. By the 9th grade, Kurt Cobain was already a full-fledged bum and drug addict. He was no longer welcome at his mother's and father's houses. In 1982, Kurt Cobain left home. He lived with various relatives but didn't stay anywhere for long. His uncle Chuck played a huge role during this time. Kurt lived in his house for several months and asked for the most important thing, to teach him how to play guitar. Chuck handed Kurt over to a friend who taught him professionally. Kurt picked it up incredibly quickly, and both his uncle and his teacher were sure that he would become an excellent guitarist. But Kurt left Chuck's house too. Tried living with his mother, but it didn't work out. Her new husband was there, and they were always drunk. It ended in a fight, and Kurt was once again alone on the streets without any means of support. And here is an interesting story. In many interviews already famous, Kurt would tell journalists that he had to live under a bridge in Aberdeen, that he slept there with other homeless people. In reality, Kurt Cobain never lived under any bridge. This is evidenced by numerous interviews with his friends, who recall that he was too weak and fragile, that he was scared of even a gust of wind. At most, he smoked weeds under the bridge. Kurt slept in garages, abandoned brick houses or hospital hallways, but never under a bridge. The story of living under a bridge was something he made up and started to believe in. Eventually, Kurt was taken by his friend Jesse Reed. Jesse's parents also took Kurt in. This, of course, was an incredible story. With a living father, mother, and all his relatives, Kurt Cobain ended up living with another family. But the Reeds were kind, God-fearing people. They fed Kurt, gave him a bedroom, and Kurt attended church services with the family. But what Kurt loved most was that the Reed house was full of musical instruments and sound systems. In 1983, for the first time, Kurt saw the band Melvin's performance. The band was playing in a parking lot on Montesano, and Kurt was fascinated by the band's sound and the energy of the crowd. Notably, the band's vocalist Buzz Osborne went to the same school as the Kurt, but he was older. At the same concert in the crowd was Chris Novoselic, the future bassist of Nirvana. Kurt had met him in school, and now they were jumping together to the Melvins. After this concert, Kurt wrote in his diary that this was exactly what he had been looking for. From then on, Kurt started attending Melvin's rehearsals. Chris Novoselic also dropped by. At these rehearsals, Kurt realized that punk rock was a freedom. Buzz Osborne became his idol and maybe even more his personal god. Like Buzz, Kurt wanted to play music, but for that he needed a band, and this is where he bonded with Chris Novoselic. He was kicked out of school again. Kurt got a job as a dishwasher, but didn't last long either. During one shift, he accidentally cut his finger and had a panic attack. He thought the injury would prevent him from becoming a guitarist. Kurt quit the job. Looking ahead, it's worth nothing that Kurt would always avoid any job that involved using sharp objects, including staplers. He would work as a janitor at the school, but never took jobs where any knives involved. Eventually, Kurt was kicked out of the Breed house for laziness and not wanting to build a future. In many accounts of Kurt Cobain's life, there is a mention of the so-called pink apartment, a room with the pink walls in a semi-abandoned house. It is there, between getting high and playing guitar, that Kurt started writing songs. Even in his early work, he reflected on isolation. Gradually, aggressive outbursts appeared in his lyrics. Sitting in his pink apartment, Kurt filled notebook after notebook, and one day he declared, "I'm going to record an album that will sound cooler than U2's." And he did. It happened like this. Together with Dale Crover from the Melvins, Kurt Cobain forms a band called Fecal Matter. Yes, basically shit. They recorded 6 songs on a cassette, and then the band fell apart. But what was important was that the first person who gave the cassette was Chris Novoselic. Chris liked the songs and wanted to start a band with Kurt. But the era of the pink apartment also ended quickly. Kurt couldn't afford the rent, and once again he found himself on the street. This time his mother Wendy came to his rescue. She gave him $200 to rent some kind of place so he didn't die on the street. Kurt rented a semi-abandoned space together with Chris. They dreamed of a great future and rehearsed every day. Kurt played electric guitar and Chris played bass. Drummers come and went. Some left on their own, others didn't suit Kurt. In his free time, Kurt filled notebooks with lyrics, watched TV, abused whatever he could get, and suddenly fell in love. He got a girlfriend. Her name was Tracy Marander. In many ways, thanks to her belief in Kurt, things started to work out for him. Their life together was like a movie. They rented an apartment in Olympia, put a huge aquarium in the center of the living room and filled it with turtles. Kurt literally filled the apartment with dolls. Tracy later recalled, "Wherever you turn, someone is always watching you." Tracy worked at a cafeteria, while Kurt didn't work at all. At first, he took care of the house, cleaned and mopped the floors, but soon gave up. He only wrote music and lyrics. Tracy saw Kurt's passion and supported him in every way. Kurt tried to get Seattle media to write about them, about Chris and Kurt, but it was lost cause. But soon, Cobain and Novoselic gave their first performance, and it turned out to be pretty comical. And here's what happened. The band, which still had no name, got a manager. Well, in a broader sense, he wasn't really a manager. It was more like someone had a friend who could talk to someone about something, so he became a manager. This guy found a party where Kurt Cobain could perform in public for the first time. At first, Kurt freaked out. He wasn't ready and they didn't even have a set list. But the manager had already arranged everything and he pulled a few people into a bit of fun. Kurt, Chris Novoselic, their girlfriends and a drummer named Aaron Buckhart. The van took them to Raymond, a town near Aberdeen that wasn't much different from it. When the van stopped at the house where the party was happening, no one really noticed that band arrived. Kurt immediately ran to amplifiers to set up the sound. This was their first performance and everything had to be cool perfect. He was nervous but stayed focused. Meanwhile, what was Chris Novoselic doing? That 2-meter tall guy backed into the bathroom and started peeing, ignoring everyone. Then he found some fake blood and spread it all over his body, and while Kurt was still adjusting amps, Chris, now covered in blood, ran into the fridge looking for alcohol. He found beer, and by this point Kurt had started playing. Chris realized that the show had started and ran to find his bass. Then, covered in blood, he rushed through the crowd. Kurt managed to keep up. The band started their first live performance. The show began with the song Downer, written by Kurt long ago. After that, there was dead silence in the room. Kurt was confused, thinking the song is terrible or something else, but he looked at Chris covered in blood and realized he had gone completely nuts. Next, the band played an early version of Iron Zeppelin. Again, silence. The crowd expected covers of Black Sabbath, Metallica, but Kurt only played his own stuff. In the end, everything turned into chaos. Chris' girlfriend started a fight with some other girl at the party. Watching all this, Kurt kept playing. Chris was in some kind of trance. He saw an open window and jumped out of it. Then he ran back into the house, kept playing, and again jumped out the window. By this time, the band finished playing. The house was in a chaos. Kurt Cobain went outside and smoked in a complete shock at the failure. For him, everything had fallen apart. Nothing went right. He went looking for Chris and found him on the roof of the van. Chris was standing there, peeing on the neighboring house. When it was time to leave, Kurt silently walked into the van, and when the whole band was ready to go, Kurt noticed that people from the party had come to see them settling off. This was the first performance of the future Nirvana. Kurt Cobain thought everything had fallen apart, but in reality it was just the beginning. Word about the crazy band spread quickly. The band played a few more parties like this, and the calling card became a cover of Love Buzz by the Dutch band Shocking Blue. In 1988, Kurt Cobain finally settled on a name for the band and declared that from now on they were called Nirvana. When asked what it meant, he replied, "Nirvana is us. Nirvana is achieving perfection." Nirvana officially performed for the first time that same year at the movie theater in Tacoma. Kurt himself drew the poster for the show. The band mostly played at various alternative band showcases, unknown to most. But Kurt didn't care. He didn't even take money for those performances. That same year, Nirvana recorded their first cassette in a Seattle studio. The cassette had 9.5 songs and cost them about $150, which Tracy gave to Kurt. The recording was done by music producer Jack Endiner. The cassette was called Safer Than Heaven. Why 9.5 songs, you might ask? Simple, they couldn't afford one more tape. All the cassettes had a phone number where the band could be reached. Eventually, one of the cassettes ended up at the Sub Pop record label. And this is where a completely new chapter in the band's life began. Sub Pop was a small Seattle record label, generally suffering financial losses. Its advantage was that the producers wanted to push the Seattle grunge wave. Another huge plus was that they had connections with the local fanzines and college radio stations. These were pretty much the only advantages of Sub Pop. And it was Sub Pop that became the first label to sign Nirvana to a 3-year contract. The contract, of course, was laughable. In the first year, the band was set to make a $6,000, second $12,000, and the third $24,000. But as you can imagine, Kurt didn't care about it. As I said, money didn't interest him, and Nirvana signed their first contract. They were supposed to release their first official album. While Kurt was at home writing new songs and rehearsing with Chris, Sub Pop was already booking Nirvana for cheap shows like C4 groups for $4, or as openers for more established bands. Sub Pop wasn't doing this on a purpose, they were just working within their abilities. If they could slot the band somewhere, they did. And Kurt agreed to all these shows. The label officially released the song Love Buzz. When the track was recorded and sent to Seattle radio stations, Kurt constantly listened to all the stations so he didn't miss Nirvana's first radio appearance. In the end, Kurt Cobain himself called the radio station and asked them to play Nirvana. He listened to their first radio appearance with his girlfriend Tracy. One day she asked him why he never wrote songs about her. Kurt didn't answer but just walked into his room. Later he picked up his guitar and sang the lyrics, calling the song about a girl. This song was dedicated to Tracy, and it was all about their relationship. When Tracy heard how cool Kurt performed it at home, she asked him who the song was about, who it was dedicated to. Kurt replied that it was about no one, he just made it up. Kurt Cobain never admitted that the song was entirely about her. In 1988, Nirvana recorded their first official album. Kurt Cobain named it Bleach. That came up with the name after Kurt seeing a social ad about AIDS, and which said, "Bleach your works before you get stoned." The album included Love Buzz and About to Go. In total, it had 11 songs. The album didn't come out right away. The producers thought it needed to be remixed and make it more radio friendly and more polished. Later, it turned out that the label was completely out of money. They didn't even have the funds to release the album. In the end, guitarist Jason Everman helped with the release. He gave his money in exchange for giving his name credited on the album. Kurt was constantly depressed. He felt like something was going wrong and starting doubting the collaboration with the label. The band had already recorded everything, but nothing was coming out. Finally, in 1989, Bleach was released. The album became popular among young people and got played on college radio stations. Sub Pop sent the band on tour. The tour, in the broadest sense, was hard to call a tour. The band traveled in vans with other bands. Nirvana recognition grew and they gained more fans, but the band had no money, not even for food. What little money they had was saved for the gas to keep them moving. Sub Pop didn't provide any daily allowances. This really started to piss Kurt off. On top of that, he started having severe stomach pains. Kurt took painkillers, went to hospital, but the doctors couldn't find anything wrong. Meanwhile, Kurt kept saying that it felt like someone was cutting him open from the inside. When the doctors suggested proper tests, including drawing blood, Kurt had a panic attack and refused. He didn't want anything done to his hands, especially needles. He was still afraid it would interfere with his ability to play. Kurt cancelled some of the shows and returned home. After catching his breath, Kurt, still in pain, went on European tour. Journalists attended their shows and wrote about Nirvana. They liked the band, but at one show Kurt had a breakdown. He felt the sound was poorly set up, freaked out, climbed into a speaker and yelled at the crowd that he was going to kill himself. The crowd cheered, thinking it was part of the performance, part of the show. Chris saw all this and started to fear that Kurt might actually jump off the speaker and break his neck. Fortunately for everyone, Kurt just smashed his guitar. The tour was hard on Kurt. He was exhausted, his stomach always hurt, and he took his anger out on the drummer, Chad Channing. The tour also distanced him from Tracy, and in the end, Kurt told her over the phone that they should live separately. When he returned home, he told her that he had cheated on her. Tracy, who had believed in Kurt more than anyone, moved out. Kurt fired Chad from the band, and Bleach sold 35,000 copies. As for Sub Pop, Kurt decided to end this collaboration with them, and a new contract was signed with Geffen Records. The band received a substantial sum, $287,000. The new drummer for the band was the great Dave Grohl. Buzz Osborne recommended him to Nirvana. After a few rehearsals, Kurt realized that Grohl was exactly what Nirvana needed. And with Grohl, Nirvana found its classic, recognizable core. As for Kurt Cobain's personal life, he indeed had cheated on Tracy with Toby Vale, the vocalist of the band Bikini Kill. Kurt was head over heels for her, but Toby was different from Tracy. Toby was a punk and feminist. For her, holding hands with a guy was considered lame. Essentially, their relationship was just about sex and nothing more. One day, one of Toby's friends wrote on the wall of Cobain's house, "Kurt smells like Teen Spirit." Here, it's worth explaining what this meant. Teen Spirit was a brand of women's deodorant in the United States, which Toby Vale used. When Kurt woke up next to her, he would smell like it too. 1990. Nirvana was already a popular band in Seattle. They had become bigger than the Melvins. Local youth idolized Cobain. His mother, Wendy, was proud of her son. The new label was super cool, with big connections to magazines, newspapers and TV. The producers were waiting for a new album. It seemed like everything in Cobain's life had fallen into place. Everything was perfect. What could possibly go wrong? Something terrible happened. Something very terrible. Kurt Cobain tried the worst drug imaginable. The man who had panic attacks at the sight of the sharp objects like knives now plunged a needle into himself. He personally told Chris Novoselic, who was shocked by the news, but there was nothing he could do about it. Kurt Cobain would regularly abuse this drug, sinking into his own personal nightmare. He would hide his addiction from his mother and producers. At some point, he would claim that those drugs helped him cope the stomach pain he had been enduring without treatment. But the pain never went away. On top of that, Toby Vale would dump him, which became a devastating blow for Kurt. He would direct his rage into his notebooks, writing songs about his breakup such as Drain You, Launch Act and Lithium. Lithium was written before Toby, but after their breakup, Kurt rewrote the lyrics. And of course, Kurt didn't forget the graffiti on the wall and wrote this song, removing his name from the original phrase. The song Smells Like Teen Spirit was first performed live on April 17, 1991, during a Nirvana show at the OK Hotel. According to one version, the famous guitar riff was improvised during that very concert. But then, as we know, everything took off. The song absolutely blew the roof of the venue, and it became the hit that fueled fan interest in Nirvana's new album. The band entered the studio to record their new album 2 weeks after the OK Hotel show. The recording process was exhausting for Cobain. First, his addiction took a toll. He started showing up late to rehearsals and recording sessions. Second, during the recording of the new album, Cobain struggled to finalize which songs should be included. Even when he decided, he doubted them and started rewriting the lyrics. For example, he couldn't bring himself to play Polly, a song he had been performing for live for a year, because he kept second guessing it. Third, this was their second album. As you know, the second work, whether it's a movie or a book, it's a challenge for any artist, because the audience will inevitably compare it to the first work. The same went for Cobain. God forbid the album was weaker than Bleach. The new album was recorded differently than on Sub Pop, where all the songs were done in 1 or 2 takes. Now Nirvana was on major label that wanted everything to be perfect, professional. The recording cost over $150,000. The album was originally supposed to be called Cheap, according to Kurt's vision. But by the end of the recording, in June 1991, Kurt Cobain announced a new title. And, as many had guessed, it became Nevermind. The album included 12 songs. Kurt bet that the most successful track would be number 6, Lithium. The label began preparing for the album's release. The song was ready, but there was no album cover yet. Here, Kurt Cobain stepped in with his vision. One day he watched a TV program about water births and declared that they should reflect birth in the water. Additionally, he wanted to criticize consumer societies, so newborn should be reaching for money. The youth were eagerly awaiting Nirvana's new album, and the label launched a promotional campaign. The band performed at popular record stores where the album would be sold. The lead single was Smells Like a Teen Spirit. During these promotional shows, Kurt noticed that the crowds had grown, with the parking lots completely packed. The band played everywhere they were needed. At one of these shows, Cobain spotted Tracy and Toby, his ex-girlfriends, jumping in the crowd. Everyone was obsessed with Nirvana. The promotional campaign lasted about 2 months. Finally, on 24th September 1991, Nevermind hit stores. The album sales were astronomical, exceeding even the label's expectations. It sold so well that it had to be repressed. Nevermind entered the Billboard 200 and quickly climbed to number 144, then 109, and by the third week it reached number 35. A month later, Nevermind topped the chart. And as for his prediction that Lithium would be the most recognizable track, he was wrong. People and TV producers kept asking for Smells Like Teen Spirit. Kurt sang it so often that he started to hate this song. During some TV performances, he deliberately sang it poorly, angering TV producers and executives. Cobain was essentially mocking them. The music video for Smells Like Teen Spirit was shot and played so frequently on MTV that Kurt asked them to air it less. When Beavis and Butthead danced to the song, he said, "Right, if they like it, just keep playing it." Grunge was an incredible story. The music genre emerged in the late 80s, and at first no one cared. Teenagers with the dirty hair, playing in garages with brick walls, creating music overloaded with distortion and raw sound. Essentially, no one needed it because, let's face it, the 80s were the era of pop, and pop was largely producer-driven projects. Of course, before Nirvana, grunge was a purely local Seattle movement. Then Nirvana came along, and at first no one paid attention. But with the release of Nevermind in 1991, everything changed. First, MTV picked up the story, and MTV elevated Nirvana above everyone else, putting them on all of the charts. Producers realized they had missed the boat. These guys dressed poorly, weirdly, had become chart toppers. And the producers started scrambling. So Nirvana opened the door. Through that door came Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and many other bands. And producers started backing them. This was probably the last non-producer driven project in music. When I first heard Nevermind, I had never heard anything like it. It hit you like a ton of bricks. I remember Lithium, the second track, with its raw power, just knocked you back. You realized that you had never heard anything like this before. Sure, there was Metallica and others, but this was completely different. It was a perfect blend of British alternative rock with a dirty metallic sound. Nirvana's influence was incredible. Grunge emerged because of Nirvana, and then from music videos and stadiums it moved into fashion. Designers started creating grunge collections for major fashion houses. John Galliano was the first to do it. Kate Moss became the icon of grunge style, and it influenced all the music. So, 1991 was a turning point for Nirvana and Cobain himself. With the release of Nevermind, the band outgrew the Seattle scene and became globally recognized. Kurt Cobain became the voice of a generation, the voice of teens. Nirvana became the face of grunge. 1991 was also a turning point in Cobain's personal life. He met Courtney Love. Courtney and Kurt had met before, but some said it was 89. Supposedly, Kurt Cobain once noticed Courtney Love at the club after the show. He knew she was a singer, the vocalist of the band Hope. He had also seen her in the movies Sid and Nancy and Straight to Hell. Courtney was dating Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins, but sparks flew between her and Kurt immediately. However, their relationship remained casual for about a year. Eventually, they realized they couldn't live without each other. To make their relationship official and announce it to the world, Cobain shouted during a 1991 performance in London that Courtney Love was the best fucker in the world. This statement became a sensation in the entertainment industry. Journalists hunted them down, writing about them constantly. Kurt and Courtney bought a house, moved in together in 1992, and became husband and wife. They married in Hawaii, and Kurt wearing pajamas during the ceremony. Kurt and Courtney's relationship was incredibly difficult, even destructive. First, they were both touring, or often communicating via fax. Second, the gossip. Courtney's friends told her not to be with Kurt. He was a hopeless drug addict. The members of Nirvana saw Courtney as a problem. Kurt distanced himself from the band. He started canceling shows to return home. Cobain constantly complained about stomach pain, and many shows had to be rescheduled. Their performance at the 1992 Reading Festival was almost cancelled. They both used illegal substances, and Kurt became so addicted that at one point Courtney learned how to revive him from overdoses. In this toxic environment, on August 18th, 1992, their child was born. A daughter named Frances Bean Cobain. The birth was accompanied by massive media attention. Vanity Fair published an article claiming that Kurt and Courtney used drugs and should immediately lose custody of their child. This broke Kurt. The band's concerts were constantly in question. Kurt awaited a court hearing which ultimately ruled that Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love would not lose custody and were capable of raising their daughter, but only with a full-time nanny present. As for Nirvana, Kurt had fully distanced himself from the band. He even traveled in a separate bus from Novoselic and Grohl to avoid arguments with him. Producers and managers ignored the stomach pain, pressuring him to play all the shows, because it was a business, not a house party. Plus, they needed another album. It was in their contract. By the time they recorded in Utero, Nirvana was on the verge of breaking up. They barely managed to finish it. However, it sold well, very well. It didn't hit #1, but it went platinum, just like Nevermind. The album's standout track was Rape Me. MTV banned this song as executives believed Cobain's performance was directed at them, mocking them. Cobain's battle with MTV over Rape Me was fierce. During performances, the network even out of the feed when it seemed like the band was about to play the song. But despite the war, MTV recorded one of the greatest performances in the band's history. Nirvana's acoustic set on MTV Unplugged. For Cobain, the approach to the acoustic performance was a panic attack. He was terrified of acoustics, of being alone with the audience. This wasn't Reading Festival, where he could just hide behind the loud music and lose himself in the chaos of the crowd. On Unplugged, he had to show what his voice was really worth. It was essentially a confession from the artist to the listener. Cobain insisted that he would only perform on Unplugged if everything was made as a funeral. The producers agreed. Cobain was late to all the rehearsals because he was high. He was terrified of this recording. The musicians rehearsed most of the time without him. On November 18th, 1993, Kurt Cobain took the stage with his guitar and performed 14 songs. He occasionally paused to smoke a cigarette and chat with the musicians. He even cracked a few jokes with the audience. If you watch the full performance, you can see how he was stalling, delaying the next song he had to play. He sang David Bowie's The Man Who Sold the World. Many believe that Cobain's performance on Unplugged gave the song new life. When the performance ended, Kurt Cobain immediately lit another cigarette, signed autographs and walked off stage, leaving the MTV crew in tears. His performance was that powerful. Some journalists noted that what happened on stage felt like more an encounter with Jesus Christ than a musical performance. The Unplugged recording was released as a separate album a year after the performance. Kurt tried to fight his addiction. He checked into rehab clinics, but he always relapsed. By 1994, everyone around him knew that one more dose could be his last. His relationship with Courtney also began to fall apart. Their new house in Seattle became a scene of constant arguments. Even the police confiscated all the guns Cobain kept in the house. Courtney even left with Francis, and Kurt didn't see them for 26 days. He went crazy without his daughter, constantly thinking that Courtney was cheating on him with her ex, Billy Corgan. In March 1994, Courtney was in Rome. Kurt flew to her, bought her gifts, even stole a piece of the Colosseum for her, and invited her to dinner. They patched things up and returned to the hotel. At 6 a.m., something terrible happened in their room. Courtney woke up to find Kurt lying on the floor. Blood was streaming from his nose, and it didn't look like another overdose. Courtney noticed an empty bowl of sleeping pills and realized Kurt had swallowed all 60 pills. This was Cobain's first suicide attempt. He remained in coma for 20 hours. Doctors fought for his life and eventually pulled him back from the brink. Kurt returned to the US, but he was a different man. Producers and musicians noticed his complete detachment. Many thought the coma had affected his mind. But Cobain had simply lost interest in everything: music, touring, band, life itself. He was deeply depressed and under tremendous pressure. Producers, managers, musicians, even his wife pressured. Others demanded he continue touring despite his stomach pain because they needed to keep making money. Courtney pressured him, threatening to leave and take Francis with her, ensuring he would never see his daughter again. Everyone urged Kurt to return to rehab, and these conversations always ended in huge arguments. Kurt called them all hypocrites, pointing out that they used drugs too and kept quiet about it. All they wanted from him was the money from touring. Drug dealers stopped selling to Cobain, fearing their dose might kill him. Cobain started visiting drug dens, wearing a ushanka and sunglasses to avoid recognition and get high among the homeless. The overall picture of Cobain's state terrified everyone, as they all suspected something terrible might happen. The incident in Rome was still fresh in their minds. At one point, Kurt gets into dangerous vortex. He asked a dealer to buy him a rifle. When asked why, Cobain claimed he was afraid of burglars. In early April 1994, Kurt Cobain, to everyone's relief, agreed to check into the Exodus Recovery Center in Los Angeles. But on the third day, he escaped. Courtney, upon learning of his escape, flew to Los Angeles to find him. but they missed each other. While Courtney searched Kurt in LA, he was already in Seattle in his house. Early in the morning on April 5, 1994, Kurt Cobain wrote to Bot, his imaginary friend who had gone to Vietnam 25 years ago. In his letter, he confessed that he no longer felt nervous before recording new songs or listening to them, and he felt guilty about it. Kurt also told Bod that he always invited Freddie Mercury, who fed off the energy of the crowd, something he could never do. Cobain wrote a long letter to Bod expressing regret that he was too sensitive and that to regain the enthusiasm he once had, he needed to become more indifferent, but he couldn't. He told Bod about his goddess wife, Courtney, and his daughter, Frances, who reminded him of himself as a child. Kurt wrote, "I can't stand the thought of Frances becoming the miserable, self-destructive death rocker that I've become." Cobain ended his letter to Bod with, "I'm too much of an erratic, moody baby. I don't have the passion anymore. So remember, it's better to burn out than to fade away." And the last line of the letter read, "Frances and Courtney, I'll be at your altar." He placed the note in his jacket pocket, smoked a few cigarettes, found his shotgun, drugs, and in the greenhouse next to the house, Kurt took his final dose, pulled out the note and saw there was some space left. He took red pen and added, "Please keep going, Courtney, for Frances, for her life, which will be so much happier without me. I love you." He placed the note on the ground and stabbed it with the red pen to keep from blowing away. Then he picked up a shotgun, placed the barrel under his chin and pulled the trigger. The search for Kurt lasts 3 days. Courtney turned Los Angeles and Seattle upside down. Friends checked every drug den and the house, but no one thought to check the greenhouse. On April 8, 1994, electrician Gary Smith discovered the body. He arrived at the house to install a new security system. Passing by the greenhouse, he noticed a leg through the window. Approaching closer, he saw a dark stain and a body with a shotgun lying across the chest. Smith immediately called the police. Within an hour, radio stations reported that a man's body had been found at the Cobain's residence. Soon after, TV channels confirmed that the body was Kurt Cobain's. Police detectives, paparazzi, and reporters filled the house. Kurt's mother, Wendy, said, "I never wanted him to join that stupid club." When Courtney arrived, she ordered the greenhouse windows to be covered with tarps to prevent any photos. Entering the greenhouse, she fell on her knees beside Kurt's body and screamed, "Why?" Kurt Cobain's death was a massive tragedy for the music world. There was no official funeral as his body was cremated. However, two memorial services were held. One was for Nirvana fans. It took place in downtown Seattle, attended by over 7,000 people. The other was a private service at a church, attended by the band members, producers, close friends, Courtney, and relatives. With Cobain's death, Nirvana died, and grunge died with it. What followed were terrible stories. The vocalist of Alice in Chains died, and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden struggled with drug problems. In short, it wasn't a happy ending. Everyone struggled to move on from the lost popularity. It led to depression and more. But most importantly, with the death of grunge, music changed again, and unfortunately not for the better, because then came the era of singing boys bands, girl bands, Spice Girls, NSYNC, Backstreet Boys. These boys and girls dancing beautifully and singing in cute, doll-like voices marked the return of producer-driven music. Producers were back, and they showed they were in charge again. They assembled boy bands and girl groups, placed them on the showbiz stage and said, "This is what you should listen to now." So Nirvana was the last major non-producer driven band. Chris Novoselic later formed a band, but it never reached Nirvana's popularity. Eventually, Novoselic became a well-known political activist in the United States. Dave Grohl became a global superstar. He led the band Foo Fighters. Courtney Love is often involved in scandals related to drugs and never remarries. And as for Kurt Cobain's daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, she's now a bit over 30, and she's a happy woman and look quite like Kurt. This is a story of Kurt Cobain. If you want something to read or to watch, I would like to recommend you documentary Kurt Cobain montage of Hack, Charles Cross book Heavier Than Heaven, Kurt Cobain's journals, and as well as watch Nirvana performances at the 1992 Reading Festival. And of course, mentioned earlier, best performance MTV Unplugged. Thank you. Good night.